Sometimes a sports debate is just noise. Hot takes, quick reactions, everyone talking past each other for a few hours and then moving on. But every once in a while, someone hits a point where the tone changes completely. That's what happened here. When Bush spoke up, it didn't sound like content anymore. It sounded like frustration that had been sitting there for months finally coming out all at once. Because this wasn't just about one opinion on a quarterback. It wasn't even about whether Shedeur Sanders played well or poorly in a single game. The argument was about something bigger, how a narrative gets built, how it sticks, and why it refuses to change even when new evidence shows up. Fans noticed it. Analysts noticed it. And now the conversation isn't just about performance, it's about credibility. So before we even talk football, we have to talk about the moment everything shifted. The day a simple evaluation turned into a full-blown debate about fairness. At the center of this entire situation was a very clear statement. Shedeur Sanders is not the answer at quarterback, not needs development, not still figuring it out, not even probably won't reach his ceiling, just a flat conclusion. And in football, that kind of language carries weight, because quarterback evaluation isn't supposed to be a snapshot, it's supposed to be a process. Young quarterbacks rarely move in straight lines. One week they look composed and decisive, the next week they hesitate and force throws. That's the position. It's reaction, adaptation, learning under pressure in real time. Coaches expect inconsistency early because that inconsistency is the classroom. The reps matter more than the results at the beginning. That's why the wording mattered so much to people listening. A definitive statement shuts the door on development. It says the film doesn't need more chapters. And the moment that tone appeared, fans started reacting not to criticism, but to certainty. Because certainty this early raises a natural question. What evidence could possibly be final already? The problem wasn't disagreement. Fans are used to disagreement. Every quarterback in the league lives inside debate, arm strength, reads, leadership, mechanics, decision-making. That's normal. What made this different was how absolute it sounded before a full body of work existed. It felt less like evaluation and more like a verdict delivered ahead of the trial. And once a verdict exists, every future moment starts getting filtered through it. A good drive becomes scripted. A bad throw becomes proof. A comeback becomes luck. A mistake becomes who he really is. That's confirmation bias creeping in, not necessarily intentional but powerful. When a conclusion comes first, observation starts serving the conclusion instead of testing it. Analysts stop asking, "What is he becoming?" and start asking, "How does this support what I already said?" That's exactly where tension started building, because people weren't just reacting to a negative opinion. They were reacting to the sense that the opinion wouldn't change no matter what happened next. Quarterbacks develop through accumulation. Reps stack, timing improves, processing speeds up, mistakes shrink. But if the evaluation freezes at the starting point, progress never counts. Every improvement feels temporary, every success treated like an exception rather than a step forward. So the debate quietly shifted. It stopped being about whether Sanders was good right now. It became about whether he was even allowed to get better in the conversation. And once fans believe growth won't be acknowledged, they stop hearing analysis and start hearing narrative. Then came the game everyone pointed to. Mid-season, national spotlight. Not a disaster, not a meltdown, just imperfect. A couple late reads, a forced throw under pressure, timing slightly off on a deep route. The kind of performance that happens to almost every young quarterback at some point. It wasn't catastrophic, it was human. But the reaction felt like something else. That single outing was treated like confirmation, like the missing puzzle piece that proved the original conclusion had been right all along. The tone sharpened. The "this is what I was saying" energy crept in. And that's when the temperature of the debate really rose. Because one game, especially in development, is data, not destiny. Every quarterback has rough tape. Go back and watch early year film of players who eventually became pro bowlers. You'll find hesitation. You'll find bad footwork. You'll find miscommunication with receivers. Development in the NFL is rarely clean. It's messy, uneven, uncomfortable. But when a shaky performance gets framed as a final answer instead of part of the curve, it tells fans something. The conclusion was waiting for a mistake. And that's what Bush pushed back on, hard. He wasn't arguing that the game was flawless. It was. He wasn't saying criticism was off limits. It is. He was challenging the rush to elevate one imperfect Sunday into career-defining evidence. That leap felt disproportionate. Because here's the real tension. When evaluation starts with doubt, mistakes feel heavier. They land louder. They travel faster. And that's what this moment felt like. Instead of stepping back and asking, what did he learn? How did he respond to pressure? Were the issues correctable? The conversation jumped straight to validation, as if the story had been waiting for this chapter. But here, where it gets interesting. The NFL doesn't stop for narratives. The schedule moves on. The next opponent shows up. And that's when something shifted. Instead of shrinking, Sanders stepped back on the field the following week and looked different, calmer, sharper, more decisive. The reads came quicker. The timing tightened up. The pocket presence felt steadier. It wasn't just a bounce-back game. It was controlled, purposeful. And that's when the spotlight flipped. Because criticism tests players, but response tests critics. When a quarterback answers doubt with performance, the next move matters. Do you reassess? Do you adjust the stance? Do you acknowledge growth? Or do you move the conversation somewhere else? That answer is what turned this from a football debate into something much bigger. The bounce back should have cooled everything down. After that rough outing, Sanders didn't go quiet, he responded on the field. Sharper decisions, cleaner progressions, tighter ball placement. The offense looked more controlled, more organized, and noticeably more confident. It wasn't hype, it was visible adjustment. The exact thing coaches always say they want from a young quarterback: process, correct, improve. Normally, that changes the tone. But instead of the conversation settling, it shifted. Suddenly, the focus wasn't production anymore. It wasn't about command of the huddle, third down execution, or situational awareness. The discussion pivoted to mechanics, throwing motion, shoulder alignment, posture in the pocket. Details that matter in coaching rooms, sure, but they had never been the headline before the improvement happened. And that's where people started noticing the pattern. Because criticism is expected. Every quarterback gets it. But when the category of criticism changes every time the player answers the previous one, it stops feeling like evaluation and starts feeling like pursuit. First it was, he can't be the guy. Then he played, it became, one bad game proves it. Then he rebounded, now it was look at the way he throws. That's not one argument evolving, that's multiple arguments rotating. Bush's frustration lived right there. Not in defending perfection, but in defending consistency. If performance is the standard, then performance should settle debates, at least temporarily. Instead, every positive step seemed to trigger a new measuring stick. And fans recognized that quickly. Sports audiences don't expect universal praise. They expect fairness. They can accept a quarterback struggling with reads. They can accept accuracy concerns. What they struggle with is when success doesn't erase previous criticism. It just unlocks a different criticism. That's when trust in the analysis starts slipping. Because the goalposts begin to feel mobile. When a player wins, the conversation moves to style. When style looks fine, it moves to ceiling. When ceiling looks promising, it moves to hypotheticals. The discussion never lands. And that endless pivot created a louder reaction than the original take ever did. Not because everyone suddenly believed Sanders was elite, but because the debate, no longer felt anchored to the same criteria week to week. Football evaluation is supposed to narrow over time. More tape equals clearer conclusions. Here, more tape created more angles, which led to the bigger question forming around the entire situation. If improvement doesn't change the conversation, then what exactly would? That question is what turned a quarterback discussion into a credibility discussion. Then came the game that complicated everything. Not perfect, no young quarterback ever is, but controlled, confident, and unmistakably different. The timing looked quicker. The hesitation that showed up earlier in the season was gone. Instead of waiting to see a receiver come open, he was throwing to the spot before the break. Anticipation, the trait coaches obsess over, finally showed up on tape. And the offense responded with him. Drives were longer. Third downs didn't feel like survival anymore. The pocket didn't look chaotic because he wasn't treating it like chaos. Subtle slides, calm resets, eyes staying downfield, small things that don't show up in box scores but completely change how a unit functions. It looked less like a rookie trying to survive and more like a quarterback trying to operate. That's usually the moment when conversations recalibrate. Because film forces honesty. When improvement is visible, analysts typically shift from "can he play" to "how good can he become?" The skepticism narrows into projection. That's the natural progression of evaluation. But this time, the pause never came. Instead, the reaction felt selective. The positive tape didn't erase the previous narrative, it coexisted with it. The good throws were acknowledged briefly, then immediately balanced by new concerns. Foot placement, arm slot, long-term ceiling, hypothetical playoff limitations. And that distinction mattered. Criticism wasn't disappearing, it was multiplying. Bush's argument grew louder right there, because the standard seemed asymmetrical. A bad game had been treated as defining evidence, yet a strong one was treated as temporary exception. One performance confirmed doubt, the other required caution. Fans notice weighting more than wording. They understand quarterbacks develop unevenly. They expect highs and lows. What triggered debate wasn't disagreement, it was permanence. Negative moments sounded final, positive moments sounded provisional. That imbalance turned a normal football conversation into something more layered. Because evaluation isn't just about what you say, it's about what changes your mind. And when visible growth doesn't meaningfully move the stance, people stop debating the player and start debating the lens. The tape had introduced uncertainty into a previously certain opinion. But instead of uncertainty softening the take expanded to absorb the new evidence without altering the conclusion. And that's when the discussion stopped being about one Sunday and started being about philosophy. What actually qualifies as proof a young quarterback is progressing? For some, it was clear development. For others, it still wasn't enough. And that gap is where the argument truly took off. By this point, it wasn't just about one quote or one game. It was about rhythm, the repetition, the cycle that kept replaying itself no matter what happened on the field. That's when the conversation shifted from performance to pattern. Because once you zoom out, you start seeing the structure. A strong negative stance gets delivered. The fan base reacts. The debate explodes. Engagement spikes. Then instead of easing up or recalibrating, the stance doubles down. Sharper wording, stronger tone, more certainty. And whether intentional or not, that cycle feeds itself. In modern sports media, reaction is currency. Strong opinions travel faster than balanced ones. A measured "let's see how he develops" doesn't light up timelines. But a firm "he's not the guy" absolutely does. It creates sides. It forces responses. It guarantees debate. That doesn't automatically make the take wrong, but it does change the incentives around it. Bush's frustration wasn't just rooted in disagreement, it was rooted in repetition. The feeling that every time Sanders took a step forward, the conversation didn't evolve with him. It reset. Same skepticism, same framing, same conclusion waiting at the end. And when that happens often enough, fans stop reacting to the content and start reacting to the consistency. They begin asking harder questions. Is this analysis? Is this projection? Or is this positioning? Because here's the uncomfortable truth about sports commentary. Being wrong quietly is forgettable. Being wrong loudly lingers. And sometimes the instinct isn't to adjust, it's to protect the original stance. That's human nature. No one likes admitting they underestimated someone. No one likes walking back certainty. But credibility in analysis depends on flexibility. Growth on the field should produce growth in the evaluation. When that doesn't happen, friction builds. Ken Carman stepping into the debate only amplified that friction. Because once other respected voices start noticing the pattern, it stops being fan defensiveness and starts being professional pushback. And that's where things got heavier. The conversation wasn't just, is Shedeur good, anymore. It became, why does the tone stay the same regardless of what happens? That question hits differently. Because if improvement doesn't shift the narrative, and performance doesn't soften the stance, then the narrative starts looking less reactive and more predetermined. And in sports media, once fans believe a storyline is predetermined, trust begins to thin. That's the stage this debate walked onto. Not a disagreement over mechanics, not a dispute over arm strength, a deeper tension about whether evaluation is adjusting with evidence or resisting it. And that tension is what made this explode beyond just football. Then the discussion took a turn that always changes the stakes, character. Because if performance debates can go back and forth forever, locker room concerns don't. Those are serious. Those are the kinds of issues that actually decide whether a quarterback keeps a job, loses a team, or splits an organization from the inside out. And that's exactly what Ken Carman pointed out. He basically said, if you're going to argue a quarterback shouldn't be trusted, it needs to be rooted in something real. Not posture, not hypotheticals, not preseason projections, but impact. How teammates respond to him, how coaches deal with him, what happens behind closed doors when cameras are gone. Quarterback isn't just another position. It's the center of the building. Every huddle, every sideline conversation, every late-game moment runs through that one voice. If players don't believe in that voice, cracks appear fast. And in the NFL, those cracks never stay hidden. They leak. Reporters hear it, staff whispers it. Anonymous sources suddenly have a lot to say. You start getting phrases like frustration internally or questions about leadership. It always comes out eventually. But with Shedeur Sanders, none of that surfaced. No teammates questioning effort. No coaches hinting at attitude problems. No background stories about division. Actually, the opposite kept popping up: preparation, film study habits, communication, composure. The boring stuff that rarely trends online but matters more than anything inside a football building. That's why Carman's point hit hard. If the on-field performance shows flashes, and the locker room shows stability, then what exactly is the foundation of the extreme doubt? Because serious quarterback concerns usually fall into three categories: talent limitation, inability to process the game, or inability to lead people. Remove the third one and the conversation changes dramatically. Now you're talking about development, not disqualification. And development takes time. Every organization understands that, especially at quarterback. So when the harshest skepticism keeps circulating without behavioral evidence behind it, fans start interpreting it differently. Not as investigation, but as assumption. Not as evaluation, but as expectation. That's the line this debate crossed. It stopped being, he hasn't proven it yet, and started sounding like, He won't prove it no matter what. And those two sentences carry completely different meanings. Carmen wasn't crowning Sanders. He wasn't declaring him a franchise savior. He was drawing a boundary. Criticism should scale with evidence. If the strongest category of concern, leadership and chemistry, shows no warning signs, then the intensity of the narrative needs to match reality. Otherwise, the conversation drifts away from football and into perception. And once a player is being judged more on perception than behavior, every throw becomes interpreted instead of evaluated. That's when debates stop resolving themselves on Sundays and start living permanently on talk shows. Here, where the whole situation became impossible to ignore, the timeline stopped matching the narrative. Because normally in sports, criticism evolves. A young quarterback struggles, people doubt him, he improves, and the conversation softens. Maybe not praise, maybe not hype, but at least adjustment. The tone follows the evidence. But that didn't happen here. Shedeur Sanders stepped onto the field earlier than many expected. He handled pressure situations. He had rough moments, every young quarterback does, but he also had real flashes. Tight window throws, late drive composure, control at the line. Not perfection, but progression. And yet the tone stayed frozen. Not cautious optimism. Not let's see more. Just the same level of certainty as before he ever played. That's what Bush kept pushing back against. Because once a player provides new data, the evaluation is supposed to update. That's the whole point of watching games instead of predicting them forever. Film replaces assumptions. Instead, the target kept shifting. At first it was, he won't see the field. Then he shouldn't start. Then one bad game proves he's not the guy. Then mechanics. Then posture. Every time the previous argument lost weight, a new one appeared. Fans recognize that pattern quickly, not because they think their quarterback is untouchable, but because they understand consistency. If success never counts but mistakes always do, the outcome is predetermined. You're no longer measuring performance, you're defending a first impression. And first impressions are powerful. Admitting they were incomplete is uncomfortable, especially publicly. Analysts build reputations on strong takes, and walking one back feels like credibility loss, even though the opposite is usually true. That tension sat at the center of this debate. Bush wasn't arguing Sanders had arrived. He was arguing that improvement should matter, that a developing quarterback shouldn't have to clear a higher bar just to move the conversation from impossible to possible. Because right now, the evaluation felt stuck at step 0 while the player had already moved forward. And that disconnect fuels fans more than criticism itself. People accept doubt. They reject dismissal. There's a difference between questioning the future and refusing to acknowledge the present. So the argument stopped being about arm talent or scheme fit. It became about intellectual honesty. If new performances don't influence old conclusions, then what exactly would? That's why this debate refuses to cool off. It's no longer about predicting what Shedeur Sanders will become. It's about whether observers are willing to update what he already showed. By this point, something subtle shifted in the conversation. The focus quietly moved away from the field and toward the people talking about the field. Because once the same arguments keep resurfacing despite new performances, fans stop debating the player and start debating the coverage. And that's exactly where things landed. The question stopped being, is Shedeur Sanders good enough? And became, what would he have to do for the answer to change? That's a dangerous place for any sports discussion to go because credibility is the currency. You can be critical, you can be wrong, you can even be harsh, but you can't appear locked in before the evidence shows up. The moment analysis feels predetermined, trust erodes faster than any interception ever could. Ken Carman's comments poured gasoline on that idea. He didn't defend Sanders as flawless. Instead, he walked through the logic. If the concern were locker room issues, that matters. If teammates were frustrated, that matters. If coaches were losing confidence, that matters. But none of that existed. No credible reports of division. No whispers of attitude problems. No signs the team didn't respond to him. Publicly and privately, the feedback leaned steady, prepared, composed, competitive. Not crowned, not condemned, developing. So if character wasn't the issue and growth was visible, what remained? That's the uncomfortable gap the conversation kept circling. Because football evaluation usually sits on three pillars: production, progression, and presence. How you perform, how you improve, and how teammates respond to you. Sanders checked at least parts of each, yet the conclusion barely budged. And when conclusions stay fixed, motives get questioned not out of conspiracy thinking but pattern recognition. Fans track takes now. They remember preseason predictions. They notice when outcomes don't adjust opinions. The internet never forgets timelines. That's why this debate exploded beyond a normal quarterback discussion. It turned into a referendum on process. Are analysts reacting to games, or are games being filtered through opinions already formed? Bush's frustration lived right there. Not anger over criticism, but over permanence. The idea that some players have to prove themselves every week while others get the benefit of development curves. Because development is supposed to include patience, quarterbacks rarely follow straight lines. They oscillate: good stretch, rough stretch, adjustment, growth. The evaluation should move with that rhythm. Instead, the rhythm felt one-sided. Improvement created new standards. Mistakes reinforced old ones. And now, heading into a new season, that tension lingers. Not about who wins the starting job, but whether the story will finally react to what happens next, instead of waiting for confirmation of what was already said. At this stage, the spotlight isn't only on the quarterback. It's on the observers. So after all the noise, all the clips, all the debates, the conversation lands in a very different place than where it started. This was never only about whether Shedeur Sanders could play quarterback. It became about whether evaluations change when reality changes. He dealt with doubt before he had snaps. Then he got snaps and showed flashes. When mistakes happened, they were magnified. When progress happened, the standards shifted. And that pattern is what people reacted to, not criticism itself, but criticism that didn't move. Because the NFL is simple at its core. Players are expected to adjust, improve, and answer pressure on the field. Sanders did that part. He competed, responded, and let performances speak instead of headlines. That chapter already played out. Now the same expectation turns outward. If analysts ask players to own results, the coverage has to own them too. If predictions miss, update them. If growth shows up, acknowledge it. Not to crown anyone early, but to keep the process honest. Heading into this season, the real intrigue isn't just what the quarterback becomes. It's whether the narrative evolves with him, or keeps chasing the version of him that existed before he ever had the chance to prove otherwise.